Music is undoubtedly the most important addition that will be made to the picture. It can do more to bring a production to life, to give it integrity, style, emphasis, meaning, and unity than any other single ingredient. With the surge of a full orchestra, there will be bigness and majesty and soaring spirits. With a nervous, fluttering melody line on a single instrument or pulsating drum beats, there will be agitation, apprehension, suspicion. Music can build tension in commonplace scenes or ease it in ones that have become visually too frightening. As a company, Disney is one that is often credited with pioneering countless styles of animation that are still influencing the industry to this day. However, the music associated with Disney has also made an impact. For many, the songs are the most memorable parts of Disney films, and the link between Disney and musical theater type songs has also had an impact on the legacy of animated films. Since the studio's first feature-length animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out in 1937, the connection between music and Disney movies was considered integral to the company's image. Animators were considered the stars of the Walt Disney Company. However, the composers, songwriters, lyricists, and orchestrators who worked on Disney films contributed greatly to the art and function of these pictures. Their work establishes character, relates the narrative, drives the pacing, indicates character motivations, and provides emotional underpinnings. Composers at the Walt Disney Studios function as storymen and gagmen. They provide as much motion as any animator, as much suspense as any effects animator, and as much color as ink and painters. In our contemporary world, Disney is also linked to musical theater in a very direct way. With a variety of stage musicals under their belt in popular markets like Broadway and the West End, Disney has further established the Disney musical as something that goes beyond just animation. This progression is generally credited to Howard Ashman, the lyricist and playwright who in the 1980s encouraged the studio to embrace the influence that musical theater had on their films. In a now legendary talk, Howard Ashman spoke to the studio about the trajectory of the American musical and Disney films, showing how they had grown alongside each other. This emphasis on the musical format led to 1989's The Little Mermaid, kicking off what's now referred to as the Disney Renaissance, a time where Disney musicals were given a specific format to work within. The post-Ashman formula is what most people talk about when talking about Disney musicals, regardless of when they were made. Sure, Ashman used terms like I Want Song retroactively to describe earlier movies, but despite featuring similar types of songs, early Disney movies did not necessarily function within the same strict framework that they do now. To give you a more complete look at the history of Disney music, we'll have to go back to the beginning, tracing how the studio's animated films have embraced the art of songwriting over the years. Let's get right into it.
Fun to be free, to be on the move, to go for a hike or whatever you like to do. Choose all there is to be done. It's fun, it's fun, it's fun to be free, fun to be free.
Early on, Disney made music the focus of many of their shorts. Though Steamboat Willie from 1928 is often credited as being the first animated short with synchronized sound, it isn't. That being said, what made Steamboat Willie so unique for the time was that its sounds and music were inseparable from the animation. When a character made a gesture, there was an accompanying sound to go with it, something that made it remarkably innovative. Furthermore, early Disney animated films integrate the evolution of the score with the progression of the film through the use of bar sheets. Created by Wilfred Jackson for Steamboat Willie, bar sheets required music to be developed before the animation began. The music then served as the backbone of the film. That is, the movie was essentially animated to fit the music, though animation-centric minds may wish to characterize the music as pre-written to support animation. A notable song from an early Disney short was Minnie's Yoo-Hoo from the 1929 short Mickey's Follies. In the song, Mickey Mouse sings about his girlfriend Minnie. Not only would it become a standard in many Mickey Mouse cartoons from 1929 to 1934, but it was also co-written by Walt Disney and Carl Stalling. This is also the first theme song written for Mickey Mouse. Minnie's Yoo-Hoo followed in the vaudeville tradition, being a number mainly there for entertainment purposes. This is made clear by the name of the short, as Follies were a subcategory of vaudeville performance. This paired well with the genre of animated shorts that were brief, direct, and typically more focused on visual gags than narrative. The focus wasn't necessarily on telling an overarching story, so the music didn't function that way. This changed in 1929 with the Silly Symphonies series, a collection of 75 animated shorts that played a crucial role in developing the company's relationship to music. The music was the primary focus of the shorts, setting the tone and narrative. But let's focus on the songs. At the end of the day, Disney's relationship to musical theater is connected to their usage of the song format to reflect character development, narrative, and other plot elements. Songs were integral to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Out of 25 songs written for the film, only 8 were chosen, with Walt only wanting songs that explicitly related to the story. At the time, musicals did have stories, but they were often in service of entertainment-focused songs, not the other way around. Walt could be very picky about music in his films, as he disliked it when characters broke into song and dance out of the blue, as often happens in Hollywood musicals. The young filmmaker stated, "We should set a new pattern, a new way to use music. Weave it into the story so somebody doesn't just bust into song." Walt was also an advocate for using dialogue to specifically introduce the musical format. For example, the song Someday My Prince Will Come begins with Snow White speaking with rhymed, metered dialogue that makes the transition into the song more seamless. This type of writing does have parallels in musical theater of the time. For example, Cole Porter was very focused on setting up his songs via speech, making the transition from dialogue to song seamless. In certain versions of You're the Top from Anything Goes, the dialogue before the song provides room for the music to begin underneath. Even without the dialogue, the opening lines are deliberately more speech-like and help the performers fully transition into the song.
Oh, I gotta hand it to you, Harry. You may be a louse, but I always said you were a louse with character. At words poetic, I'm so pathetic that I always have found it best, instead of getting them off my chest, to let them rest unexpressed.
Upon release, Snow White quickly rose to fame and would go on to not only receive critical and commercial success, but also set the stage for animated films that featured music. The songs were so integral to the film that it would become the first feature film to have an officially released soundtrack, with songs like Someday My Prince Will Come becoming cemented in US American pop culture. In 1938, William G. King of the New York Sun referred to the movie as the nearest approach to true film opera yet created, showing that the public also perceived the film as not only an innovative thing for animation, but music as well. This is also indicative of the type of music the film was based off of. Instead of being driven by the jazz-influenced music of Tin Pan Alley and musicals of the time, the film's music was based in a style that reflected European opera and operetta. So the music in Snow White was important to the film. The musical structure of the film is also distinct in the sense that the only characters who sing are the ones who have the quote-unquote moral high ground. This likely followed the European trope of musical talent being a sign of purity. It's worth noting that this tradition also has an anti-Semitic background. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend checking out Ruth Cohen's book, The Music Libel Against the Jews. However, the next feature-length cartoon that the studio released, Pinocchio, broke this rule, having the character Honest John sing a song that would establish the archetype of the Disney villain song. The early Disney films up until the 1960s were largely inconsistent as far as musical content was concerned. Though certain principles such as smooth transitions in and out of songs were upheld, there was no hard and fast rule about how many songs a given movie should have or where they should occur in the film. Though some movies shared processes for developing the music, such as films up until Cinderella in 1950 having pre-written scores, each film used music in different ways. What we see from the start is that music operates in a different way in early Disney films than it does in modern ones. While it is possible to see the origin of the I Want song trope, it's not always strict. For example, I Want songs weren't necessarily always at the beginning of the films like they are today. In Snow White, there are even 2 I Want songs, with the second one occurring towards the end of the movie. There were also movies like Bambi that didn't feature them at all. Bambi also represented another type of Disney movie that had original songs, but used them as a disembodied narrator. Other films like Sleeping Beauty also used this method, having songs that are musical numbers, and then other songs that function more like narration. Unlike stage musicals of the 40s and 50s like Oklahoma that heavily relied on a large portion of songs sung by the characters to tell an overarching narrative, Disney animated musicals of the early 20th century did not always have to fulfill certain narrative archetypes, but rather just have songs in the film, regardless of whether or not they were sung by the characters or were even full musical numbers. This is where I believe the term animated musical begins to become a distinct type of musical from stage or Broadway-influenced musicals. Instead of requiring a significant portion of songs to take up a majority of a given narrative, animated musicals are more flexible. Though Disney is more well known nowadays for animated movies that are easily adaptable into stage musicals, the early 20th century films helped define the framework for what would become the genre of animated musical. This can be seen in franchises such as The Land Before Time. Most of those movies have only 3 or 4 musical segments, making them not as ready for stage adaptations as traditional musicals, but they're still perfectly welcome within the realm of animated musicals. This isn't very unusual for the current landscape of family entertainment. It isn't uncommon for a film to have musical numbers, even if there are only 2 or 3. Another thing that makes early Disney musicals unique is that they had songs during the opening title cards. For example, in Cinderella, there's just a song that sets up the character of Cinderella, talking vaguely about the protagonist. I suppose this still exists in intro songs of movies and ending credits, but nowadays opening songs typically are accompanied by a montage or serve some sort of exposition instead of vaguely commenting on the plot as a way to say the title of the film while the title cards roll. The Disney musical began interacting more with traditional musical theater around the mid-20th century, specifically through live-action movies. For example, 1946's Song of the South had a more substantial amount of songs that made the film seem more like a traditional Hollywood musical. This surely set the stage for a movie like 1964's Mary Poppins that took the idea of a Disney musical to new heights. Mary Poppins is unique because it was a Hollywood-style musical that was released around the time of My Fair Lady and The Sound of Music. The revival of the traditional film musical was in full swing, and Disney was able to show that not only were they able to compete, but they were a force to be reckoned with. Despite the death of Walt Disney in 1966, the company did not eliminate the Disney musical format from its vocabulary. Musicals like The Jungle Book and The Happiest Millionaire were still released after he passed, but they were the last ones that he had a personal hand in. This was also around the time that Disney would begin experimenting with bringing the Disney musical to the stage. There was actually a stage adaptation of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs from 1969 that would go on to even be performed at Radio City Music Hall in 1979. After Mary Poppins, Disney musicals began to take more direct influences from the traditional musical theater format. The Happiest Millionaire, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and even The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh showed that a majority of Disney musicals of this era had substantial amounts of songs that either commented on or advanced the plot, breaking away from more abstract types of song integration. However, the 80s would bring around a different time for Disney, with the company trying to broaden its horizons and focus more on films that were not as invested in the company's pre-established image of family-friendly musicals. Now referred to as the Disney Dark Age, Disney began losing the critical success it was known for, specifically producing fewer and fewer musicals. The Fox and the Hound feels like an interesting callback to films like Bambi. There are original songs, but the music serves as a narrator for the story, being overlaid on top of scenes. After going a while without a traditional Disney musical, Disney would reach rock bottom with 1984's The Black Cauldron, a film that didn't feature any songs at all. This is where Howard Ashman comes in. 1988's Oliver and Company was a more traditional Disney musical, featuring songs written by pop stars of the day such as Billy Joel, Huey Lewis, and Barry Manilow. However, per recommendation of his friend David Geffen, Jeffrey Katzenberg would bring in Howard Ashman to write lyrics for the opening number Once Upon a Time in New York City, beginning Ashman's brief but influential collaboration with the company. Though it's not necessarily remembered as such, I believe that Oliver and Company was both a return to form and a step forward. Not only did it bring back the Disney musical, but it also hinted at what was to come with the Disney Renaissance. For example, Once Upon a Time in New York City is similar to the opening sequence title songs from earlier Disney films, but it also functions more like an exposition song that would be seen in a Broadway musical. Given Ashman's experience and dedication to the format of the American musical, it seems like this could have been intentional. When Ashman began working on The Little Mermaid, it became clear that the Disney musical format would be changed forever. That film in particular features many different elements that fully connected the Disney format with the Broadway musical. For example, there was an opening exposition number, an I Want song, vaudeville-style numbers, and even a villain song. These clearly defined archetypes would prove to be very influential in later Disney films, and are still considered mainstays of the studio to this day. Disney had used some archetypes before, but Ashman stepped in and turned them into a formula. On top of this, Ashman also continued Walt's philosophy of not wanting to have characters gratuitously burst into song. Instead, each song had to be integrated into the story in a way that explained the narrative. If you could remove a song from the movie and still understand the narrative, the song was not properly interwoven. The Little Mermaid contains some of the best Disney music since the glory days. Here at last, once again, is the kind of liberating, original, joyful Disney animation that we all remember from Snow White, Pinocchio, and the other first-generation classics. The critical and commercial success of The Little Mermaid not only threw the company into the Disney Renaissance, but it also fully defined what a Disney musical was to be known for moving forward. Despite some early Disney movies involving musical theater composers, there wasn't always a conscious effort to structure the films in an identical way to a traditional musical. Post-Mary Poppins films hinted at the trend, but the Disney Renaissance would go on to bind the two. However, this doesn't mean that every Disney Renaissance film was exactly like a Broadway musical. For example, most films of the era did not have a full-blown finale number, something that was almost a requirement requirement in traditional musicals. There were exceptions like Hercules, but other films just had a reprise or some type of callback to the beginning of the movie. The rediscovered link between Disney and Broadway also paved the way for Disney to start making more stage adaptations of their movies. With the stage production of Beauty and the Beast, it was clear that not only could Disney musicals be written like Broadway shows, but they could also become Broadway shows. I also want to note that, despite the fact that Disney was now known for these big-budget musicals, the early Disney form of the animated musical was still very influential. For example, franchises like The Land Before Time changed significantly after the Disney Renaissance began. What was originally a movie with no songs became a musical franchise with 13 sequels. A notable exception was Anastasia, a movie that was not only spearheaded by ex-Disney employee Don Bluth, but it also followed the musical theater format so much that many assumed it was just a film made by Disney. Though Disney certainly didn't invent musical theater, by this point animated musicals were their signature. This didn't stop other studios from trying to emulate the format though, even if not as sustainably. The new life given to the Disney musical didn't necessarily mean that Disney didn't experiment in other ways. In a move that is widely considered to have ended the Disney Renaissance, the 1999 film Tarzan used music in a montage way, similar to what had been done with The Fox and the Hound in the early 80s. Instead of featuring music that was sung by the characters, the film utilized pop music by Phil Collins that served as a sort of disembodied narrator leading the audience through the story. Towards the end of the Renaissance and the 2000s, Disney also invested more in low-budget direct-to-home video musical sequels that only featured a few songs per film, something that feels like a mixture of the big-budget Renaissance films and earlier Disney films. There were some of the Renaissance archetypes, such as the I Want song, but each movie used music in different ways, likely as a result of lower budgets. It was also around this time that TV series like Hercules were experimenting with musical numbers within television episodes, providing a new avenue for the Disney musical. There were also a few theatrically released movies that featured musical numbers, but they didn't achieve the same success that 90s movies did. While Hollywood in general was experiencing a revived interest in the movie musical as a whole, Disney seemed to prefer laying low. At the same time, Disney was adapting more and more movies for the stage, premiering them on Broadway, on musical tours, and even in their theme parks. The idea that Disney movies were directly tied to musicals wasn't the focal point of the company's output in the early 2000s. With forays into computer animation and the eventual acquisition of Pixar, it seemed like the Disney musical was something Disney was known for, but was not necessarily the future of the company. Instead, the forward-pushing aspect of Disney musicals actually seemed to come from their TV output. With the rising popularity of the Disney Channel original movie musical, thanks to franchises like The Cheetah Girls and High School Musical, that seemed to be the most promising department for building on the pre-established Disney musical formula. And indeed, some of these films did subvert expectations. For example, I Want songs weren't necessarily the backbone of these movies. Instead, each film almost worked backwards, having focal point songs near the climax that the films would build up to. These movies also didn't feature soundtracks that were inspired by Broadway. Instead, they were more influenced by pop music of the time, giving them an entertainment aspect that was more akin to vaudeville shows. There were musical numbers that progressed the story, but then there were also songs like Dance With Me from the Cheetah Girls 2 that featured disembodied narrator voices and therefore felt more like extended music videos. After almost a decade of not releasing a big-budget animated musical, Disney released The Princess and the Frog in 2009, a film that was not only a return to the hand-drawn format, but also the Disney Renaissance princess musicals. The music in this movie was similar to the Renaissance films, complete with exposition songs, I Want songs, and villain songs. This led to Tangled, another film that uses many Renaissance tropes. However, in 2013, the movie Frozen would lead us into the current era of Disney musicals that are directly inspired by modern Broadway. By continuing the tradition of hiring songwriters directly from Broadway, the past 7 years of Disney musicals have done a similar thing to what Howard Ashman began in the Disney Renaissance. They have been able to look back at the Disney musical format that has established the company's reputation, while also moving forward and expanding the vocabulary of what a Disney musical is. This doesn't always mean maintaining the formula. For example, both Frozen and Frozen 2 stretched the definitions of what I Want songs and villain songs could be. Despite this, though, the songs written for the movies are undeniably inspired by contemporary musical theater. The modern era of Disney musicals has also featured more series and Disney Channel-oriented programming, with shows like Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure fully integrating Broadway-style musical numbers into episodes. The DCOM musical has also continued to live on through franchises like Descendants, while the Disney theme parks continue to have stage shows that entertain audiences at all of their resorts worldwide. Over the last 90 years, Disney music has changed a lot. From the early vaudeville-esque days, all the way through the Disney Renaissance to modern-day movies, it's clear that the execution of musicals has been adapted to fit the medium of film, musical trends, and different types of stories. However, the purpose of musical numbers in Disney films has remained the same: to add emotions and expressions that simply cannot be said with only words. dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep. In dreams you will lose your heartaches. Whatever you wish for, you keep. Have faith in your dreams, and someday your rainbow will come smiling through. No matter how your heart is grieving, if you keep on believing, the dream that you wish will come true.